Introduction to evolution. So, some common misconceptions about evolution. First is that evolution is only a theory. This is wrong because in science, a theory is a well-tested explanation. The theory of evolution is robust and validated, like theories in other scientific fields. Another misconception is that evolution explains the origin of life. Evolution explains how life changes and diversifies instead after it has emerged, but does not explain how life originally began. Another one is survival of the fittest means the strongest survive. Fitness in evolution to reproductive success, not just physical strength. It often favors traits that enhance reproduction in various ways. Another one is that humans aren't evolving anymore. Humans are still evolving, though chances may be slow and not always easily observable. Adaptations continue to occur in response to environmental pressures. Another one is that gaps in the fossil record argue against evolution. Fossil records are inherently incomplete, but many transitional fossils exist, demonstrating the evolutionary link between species. Another one is that humans descended from apes. Humans did not evolve from apes, gorillas, or chimps. We share a common ancestor and follow different evolutionary paths. If we evolved from apes, there would be no apes. Okay, so what is evolution? Talking about the theory of evolution. It is a process of genetic change in a population over time due to interactions with biotic and abiotic environmental factors. Organisms constantly face environmental changes that limit their ability to survive, such as severe weather, famine, and competition. Organisms that survive long enough to reproduce have the opportunity to pass along their traits to their offspring. So, what is the basis of evolution? The two goals for all living things are survival and reproduction. The function of all living things is to find the best way to do both. So, some adaptations and variations. First is adaptations and survival. So, adaptation is a structural, behavioral, physiological process that helps an organism survive and reproduce in its particular environment. Some examples are camouflage, that allows organisms to become almost invisible to predators. It can be structural if the organism was born that way, or physiological if changes occur based on mood or temperature. And migration. This allows organisms to move in large groups to relocate to find food, and they are more protected from predators when traveling in large groups. So behavioral is because this is any behavioral change. Another one is hibernation. This allows organisms to reduce their metabolism to save energy. This is considered physiological because it involves anything internal chemistry or body temperature. Another adaptation and variation is mimicry. It's a unique structural adaptation where a harmless species resembles a harmful species in coloration or structure. So the butterfly example, a viceroy is palatable to predators and a monarch butterfly is not palatable. So predators cannot distinguish between the real and the mimic. So how do adaptations develop? Adaptations are the results of gradual accumulative changes that help an organism survive and reproduce. These changes are results of random, heritable mutations in DNA that accumulate over generations. Variations are structural, functional, or physiological differences between individuals within the population that occur by genetic mutation. So that means that not all variations are adaptations. So from variation to adaptation, the color of the English peppered moth was highly influenced by genetic mutation and the environment. Before the Industrial Revolution in 1848, most of the population was grayish white with black specks, which is less than 2% black. So during the Industrial Revolution, 50 years later, in 1898, the peppered moth population was mostly black, 95% with very few white moths in the population. So, key differences between variation and adaptation. Variation, that means any difference between the same individual. The scope focuses on individuals, and the cause is genetic mutations and environmental factors. It doesn't serve a purpose, it's just random diversity, and some example is different eye color in humans. Adaptations, that is a trait that improves an organism's chance of survival and reproduction. It focuses on the entire population or species. It is caused by natural selection over many years, and its purpose is to specifically help the organism fit their environment. One example is a camel's hump for storing fat in the desert. Okay, fitness. That is the ability of an organism to reproduce successfully. Inheritable mutations can be neutral, which has no immediate effect on an individual's fitness, harmful, which reduces an individual's fitness, or beneficial, increases an individual's fitness. So mutations that once had no advantage or perhaps a disadvantage may become favorable in a changing environment in this way, as they can provide a selective advantage. So some types of mutations, this is somatic cells. These mutations are not inherited and do not contribute to evolution. The mutation disappears from the population when the organism dies. And gametic cells, these mutations are passed on through the egg or sperm, and they have the potential to be inherited, thus contributing to changes in the gene pool. Okay, natural selection. This is a selective advantage. It is positive mutations that provide a selective advantage. This genetic advantage that one organism has over its competitors to survive and reproduce. It is also specific to the environment that the organism is in. Over time, a selective advantage will cause the organism's traits to be favored. Those traits will become more common. And natural selection, this is the process that results when characteristics of a population changes over many generations. The theory of natural selection explains the preservation of favorable variations and rejection of unfavorable variations in nature, known as selective pressure. There are 3 types of natural selection that can affect the frequency of heritable traits in a population: stabilizing selection, directional selection, and disruptive selection. So stabilizing selection is the most common phenotype is favored. For example, beetle color in human birth weights. It prevents evolution, extreme selected against. Okay, directional selection, that actually favors the extremes variation. For example, beetles in darker environment, greyhound, dog speeds, and pepper moth colors. Disruptive selection is both extremes favored, but the average selected against. It can result in very distinct populations, such as beetles in a patchwork environment, and extreme size difference in mature male co-host salmon. Okay, selective pressures. A selective pressure on a population is any environmental condition that selects for certain characteristics, phenotypes, in some individuals, and selected against different characteristics for other individuals. So abiotic, which is non-living, it may include light, wind, soil, and water. And biotic, which is living, some pressures are predators, parasites, and competition. Reproductive fitness. When discussing natural selection, the word fit or fitness is used. Reproductive fitness is the contribution an individual makes to the gene pool of the next generation by producing offspring that will survive long enough to reproduce. It is often described as the number of reproductively viable offspring that an organism produces to the next generation. An organism with many viable offspring has high fitness, whereas an organism with few or no viable offspring has low fitness. Okay, now on to artificial selection. So artificial selection refers to the breeding of organisms by selecting the most desirable traits among them using biotechnology to produce organisms as useful products. In this case, later generations of species are unlike the original wild sources. Artificial selection is a form of selective breeding where selective pressures are exerted by humans on populations in order to improve or modify particular desirable traits. So, artificial selection in food crops. So, this is the case of the Brassica oleracea, which is wild mustard. So, over 4,000 years of selective breeding has transformed a single wild species into diverse common vegetables. So, like broccoli, which is selected for flower buds and stems, Brussels sprouts, selected for lateral buds, and cauliflower, which is selected for sterile flower clusters. Hybridization, this is where varieties remain the same species. For example, broccoli is a cross between broccoli and cauliflower. So why do we breed crops? Farmers and scientists modify crops to achieve specific goals. So one is yield and nutrition, so it increases the amount of food and its nutrition density, and resilience, creating varieties that are drought resistant or pest resistant. Limits and trade-offs of artificial selection. Artificial selection is a balancing act. It is not without risks. The growth trade-off is one risk. Plants bred for rapid growth may become sensitive to poor soil conditions. Another is genetic variation. Selective breeding intentionally removes unwanted traits, leading to lack of genetic variation. Breeders must maintain diversity so crops can adapt to future environmental changes. And risk of monoculture. Monoculture is the practice of planting the same variety of species over vast areas of land. Advantages is that it's easier to manage with standardized equipment, and there are specialized herbicides and fertilizers which will work efficiently. And the risk of that is the lack of genetic variation makes the entire crop vulnerable, and a single disease or pest can wipe out the entire population. So, natural versus artificial selection. Natural selection, this is where the environmental conditions in nature determine which individuals will survive and reproduce in current conditions, which will affect the gene pools of future populations. Artificial selection is the human pressures that select traits which will be passed on to successive generations. Okay, here are some scientific contributors to evolution. So this is Georges Louis Leclerc. It's Comte de Buffon. Speculated that humans and apes have a common ancestor, suggested that species change over time, and suggested that Earth is over 6,000 years old. Charles Darwin. He created the theory of evolution by natural selection. This is a theory that explains how life has changed and contributes to changes during Earth's history. More offspring is produced that can survive. Individuals of a population have variations. Individuals with favorable traits to local conditions will produce more offspring, and process for change is slow and gradual. Next guy is Georges Cuvier, a French naturalist who have founded paleontology and showed through fossils that species had changed over time and many had gone extinct, laying groundwork for evolutionary thinking. Next guy is Thomas Robert Malthus, an English economist who observed populations grow faster than food supply, creating competition for survival, an idea Darwin directly applied to natural selection. Next guy is Alfred Russel Wallace, a British naturalist who independently developed a theory of natural selection at the same time as Darwin, whose 1858 letter pushed Darwin to finally publish his findings. Next guy is Charles Lyell, a Scottish geologist who proved Earth was shaped by slow, gradual processes over millions of years, giving Darwin the deep time scale that natural selection required. The last guy is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, a French naturalist who was once the first to propose that species change over time in response to the environment, though his mechanism of inherited acquired characteristics was incorrect. The evidence for evolution. So biogeography supports so that geographically close environments are more likely to be populated by related species than locations that are geographically separate but environmentally similar. Animals found on islands often closely resemble animals found on its closest continent. Animals on islands have evolved from mainland migrants, with populations becoming adapted over time. Fossils of the same species can be found on the coastline of neighboring countries, and closely related species are almost never found in exactly the same location or habitat. The fossil record. This is the collective accumulation of artifacts which have been fossilized all over the world. The fossil record provides the following evidence. Fossils are found in young layers of rock or more similar to species alive today. Fossils appear in chronological order in rock layers. And not all organisms in the fossil record at the same time. Changes are slow and they take millions of years. However, we do not have the remains of every organism that has ever lived. Most decompose before they even have the chance to become fossils. In embryology has been used to determine evolutionary relationships between animals. Okay, vestigial features and anatomical oddities. A vestigial feature is a primitive and non-functioning, or only marginally functioning, structure that is homologous to a fully functioning structure in closely related species. For example, a cave fish that's blind, yet it still has eyes. The anatomical features of different species, biography, and the fossil record provided Darwin with evidence that species have changed over time and that species appear to share in common ancestry. Darwin wondered if nature, like human breeders, might be able to favor certain individuals in a population over others. So the modern theory of evolution, evolutionary biology has made tremendous advances since Darwin. So genetics allowed scientists to uncover the mechanisms of heredity and actual source of biological variation. The fossil record is now extensive, and ability to interpret records has advanced. So one is the age of Earth. Modern geology, physics, and astronomy provides compelling evidence that Earth is more than 4.5 billion years old, in contrast to past beliefs that species can never change. 2. Modern synthesis. So gene pool is the complete set of all alleles that contained within a species or population. And mutation rates, which is relatively low for individuals but can be numerous in populations overall. Next is homologous genes and pseudogenes. Since DNA carries genetic information, scientists can determine how closely organisms are by comparing their DNA. So the more similar the DNA pattern, the more closely related the organisms. And the last one is modern paleontology. The sciences of plate tectonics and paleontology have greatly enhanced our understanding of evolution. Okay, now on to the mechanisms of evolution. So some patterns of evolution includes adaptive radiation. So adaptive radiation is the diversification of a common ancestral species into a variety of differently adapted species. Adaptive radiation results in one group giving rise to 3 or more groups of different species. So islands are excellent places to study speciation. Biologists refer them to as living laboratories. Islands give organisms that have disappeared from a parent population to the opportunity to change in response to new environmental conditions and relative isolation. The next pattern is divergent evolution. This is a pattern in which species that were once similar to an ancestral species diverge or become increasingly distinct. 2 or more species evolve increasingly different traits, resulting from different selective pressures. So there are 2 predictable outcomes. The competition between species is minimized as new species diverge to fill specialized ecological niches, New species continue to evolve until the most available resource is used, and the result is an overall increase in biodiversity as a single species or group evolves to fill. Convergent evolution. A pattern in which similar traits arise because different species have independently adapted to similar environmental conditions. Two or more species become increasingly similar in appearance in response to similar selective pressures. The two predictable outcomes. Natural selection will favor the evolution of similar traits in similar environments, and also while some traits will converge in form or function, each species will retain other features that provide evidence of a distinct evolutionary past. Okay, last one is coevolution, a process in which one species evolves in response to the evolution of another species. As species co-evolve, one or both species may become increasingly dependent on the other. This often strengthens symbiotic relationships. One example is morphological matching. Hummingbirds and flower shapes have evolved together. So, for example, curved tubular flowers often match the bill curvature of specific hummingbird, such as sickle bills. So, how does evolution occur? Genetic variations create random mutations in a population. Natural selection acts upon that variation in a non-random way. So, individual organisms do not evolve, populations do. When looking at evolution, we need to look at the gene pool of a species, which is all of the genes in a population. So some factors that change allele frequency. Number one is mutations. Mutation is a change that occurs in an individual's DNA, and a heritable mutation has the potential to affect an entire gene pool. The effect is changing allele frequencies. Number two is gene flow. When an organism migrates and interbreeds with a nearby population, it alters the alleles within that population and creates a new gene pool. That effect may change allele frequencies in either or both populations. Number three is non-random mating and inbreeding. Non-random mating, organisms may prefer to mate with others of the same genotype or different genotypes and phenotypes. Its effect does not affect frequencies of alleles. It increases proportions of homozygous individuals in populations. Number four is natural selection. Organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on genes that aided their success. This process causes species to change and diverge over time. Number five is sexual selection, a form of natural selection in which traits that specifically enhance mating successes are favored. It's based in general competition between males and choices made by females. Sexual selection produces traits that are beneficial for mating, but in some situations can be detrimental for a species. Okay, genetic drift. Random chance of who survives and who doesn't affect allele frequencies. Fitness is a probability, not a guarantee. This produces evolutionary change independently of natural selection. There are two main types, founder and bottleneck. So the founder effect, when an organism colonizes a new area, like an island, only very few make up the original population. Due to its random chance, the alleles they bring over might be in different proportions than the original population. A less dominant variation from the original population may have higher fitness in this new area. Darwin discovered this with the Galapagos birds. The bottleneck effect. It's the same concept as the founder effect, but caused by massive population reduction and followed by recovery in numbers. So an example, when a disease kills 9 out of 10 trees, the remaining trees are more likely diseases resistant than the original population, but their other alleles will be different ratios as well. Speciation. Speciation is the form of new species from existing species. A species is a population whose members can mate under natural conditions and produce fertile offspring. Microevolution is the changes that occur within a species, and for a population to become different species, they must be reproductively isolated in some way. It reduces gene flow between groups. So over time, mutations will change groups. Okay, mechanisms of reproductive isolation. A reproductive isolating mechanism is any biological factor that prevents the two populations from interbreeding when living in the same region. So this can be due to differences in the breeding season, physical or behavioral traits, habitat preferences, or the compatibility of gametes. These mechanisms are quite subtle, and organisms that appear similarly may not interbreed. Okay, reproductive isolation. Over time, this isolation will result in greater differences between the groups because of the lack of gene flow. These differences lead to reproductive isolations, the inability of two organisms to reproduce with one another. So reproductive isolation can occur at 2 points. Prezygotic isolation, so that's before the zygote. This is prevention of mating or fertilization. And postzygotic, which is after the zygote. So the zygote forms, but fertile offspring are not produced. So prezygotic mechanisms, which is prevention of mating. Mechanisms that are impeding mating between species or prevent fertilization of the eggs. So behavioral, which is the use of special signals or behaviors that are species-specific to prevent interbreeding with closely related species. These can be songs, courtship rituals, pheromones, and habitat or ecological. Two species may live in the same general region but in different habitats, so they may rarely encounter each other. Temporal, two species mate or have reproductive cycles that occur at different times of the day or different seasons during the year. Mechanical, species that are closely related may attempt to mate but fail to achieve fertilization because they are anatomically incompatible. So this is genital anatomy, and compatibility is very species specific. And gametic, if gametes, which are sperms and egg from different species, do meet, gametic isolation ensures they will rarely fuse to form a zygote. Okay, postzygotic mechanisms. In rare cases in nature, sometimes the sperm of one species fertilizes and an egg of another species, and a hybrid zygote is produced. Mechanisms that prevent zygote from developing into a healthy fertile adult are hybrid inviability, which is the death of a zygote or embryo, genetic incompatibility that stops hybrid during development. For example, a wood frog and a leopard frog hybrids, they die within a day. Hybrid sterility, so hybrid offspring is sterile. And hybrid breakdown. Sometimes first-generation hybrids of cross-species are viable and fertile, but when hybrids mate, offsprings of the next generation are sterile or weak. Okay, modes of speciation. Within an isolated gene pool, any mutation in one population cannot be shared with others. Any subsequent and significant evolutionary changes that occur in either population will result in the formation of two separate species. So this is allopatric speciation. This is when a species is split into two or more isolated groups by a geographical barrier. And sympatric speciation, when populations that live in the same geographical area diverge and become reproductively isolated. So polyploidy can result in sympatric speciation. A mutation creates double the number of organisms. The species can produce fertile offspring when mated with another polyploidy, but sterile when mated with the original population. Okay, so human actions and speciations have influenced the evolution of new species. And macroevolution. This is the large-scale evolutionary changes, including the formation of new species and new taxa. Okay, talking about the speed of evolutionary change, there's a theory of gradualism. So evolutionary changes are slow and steady, gradual, before and after a divergence. So basically, big changes occur by the accumulation of many smaller changes. The last one is theory of punctuated equilibrium. Evolutionary change of long periods of equilibrium that are interrupted by periods which are bursts of divergence due to major environmental changes.